The bullet grazed the woman's shoulder as she dove behind the water trough, her dark hair spilling loose from its pins. And in that moment, everyone on Main Street knew Shoshone. Idaho would never be the same. It was August 1882, and the high desert sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street where Helena Ramsey crouched, clutching her bleeding arm while angry voices rose from the crowd gathering outside the saloon. She had not meant to shoot anyone. The gun had been in her hand purely for protection when Jasper Coltrane tried to force himself on her in the back room of the Silver Dollar. The sound of the shot still rang in her ears, mixing with the pounding of her heart and the furious shouts of the men pouring out onto the street. Coltrane was the nephew of the town's wealthiest rancher, and Helena was just a woman trying to make her way west after her father's death left her with nothing but debts and desperate hope. Sheriff Marcus Thornton arrived within minutes, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden boardwalk. He was a hard man, shaped by years of keeping order in a lawless territory, and his eyes held no sympathy when they fell on Helena's trembling form. Behind him came Thomas Coltrane himself, silver-haired and powerful, his face twisted with rage. "That woman shot my nephew," Thomas roared, pointing at Helena with a thick finger. "Jasper is bleeding out in that saloon right now, and I want justice." Helena stood on shaking legs, pressing her hand against her wounded shoulder. Blood seeped between her fingers, staining the pale blue fabric of her dress. "He attacked me," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I defended myself." The sheriff's expression remained unmoved. He looked past her to where several men were carrying Jasper out of the saloon, his shirt soaked red. The younger Coltrane was conscious, groaning dramatically, and Helena could see the wound was in his side, likely not fatal if treated properly. But the crowd's mood was turning ugly, and she recognized the dangerous gleam in their eyes. "Self-defense or not, you shot a man," Sheriff Thornton said coldly. "And in this town, Thomas Coltrane's word carries more weight than a stranger woman with no family and no prospects. I am giving you until dawn to get your things and leave Shoshone. If you are still here when the sun rises, I will put you in a cell, and I cannot promise what will happen after that." Helena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had spent the last of her money getting here, had taken a room at the boarding house and a job serving tables at the restaurant with hopes of building a new life. Now those hopes crumbled like dried clay. "You cannot do this," she whispered. "I have rights." "You have until dawn," the sheriff repeated, turning his back on her dismissively. That was when the voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk, calm and steady and absolutely certain. "She goes, I go." Every head turned toward the speaker. Warren Pike stood near the hitching post where his sorrel mare waited patiently, one hand resting on his gun belt, the other holding his hat against his thigh. He was tall and lean, weathered by sun and wind, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of a winter sky. Helena had seen him around town during her 2 weeks in Shoshone, always quiet, always watching, a cowboy who worked the range for the smaller ranchers and kept mostly to himself. Sheriff Thornton's jaw tightened. "This is not your concern, Pike." "I am making it my concern," Warren said, stepping forward with an easy confidence that made several men in the crowd shift uncomfortably. "That woman defended herself against a man twice her size, who has a reputation for rough treatment of the saloon girls. Everyone here knows it, even if they are too afraid of Coltrane money to say it out loud. If you run her out of town for protecting herself, then Shoshone is not a place I want to call home anymore." Thomas Coltrane's face darkened to an alarming shade of purple. "You would throw away your livelihood for a woman you do not even know," Warren's gaze never wavered. I would throw away a lot more than that for what is right. Your nephew is going to live. The doctor is with him now, and that wound is not serious. But if Miss Ramsey here is forced to leave town with no money and an injured shoulder, traveling alone through territory where Shoshone and Bannock raiders have been active, she might not be so lucky. That would be on all of you." Helena stared at this unexpected defender, her heart hammering for entirely different reasons now. She had exchanged perhaps 3 sentences with Warren Pike in the brief time she had been in town, yet here he stood, risking everything for her sake. His profile was strong against the afternoon sun, and something in his steady presence made her feel less alone than she had in months. The sheriff looked between Warren and Helena, clearly calculating. Warren Pike might be just a cowboy, but he was respected among the working men of the territory. His skill with horses and cattle was well known, and he had a reputation for fairness and quiet courage. If he left Shoshone in protest, others might follow, and the smaller ranchers who depended on his expertise would make their displeasure known. "This is ridiculous," Thomas Coltrane snarled. One foolish cowboy does not change anything. But Warren was not alone for long. Old Samuel Hayes, who owned the dry goods store, cleared his throat. "The boy has a point, Thomas. Your Jasper has been trouble before. Maybe the girl had cause." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Helena saw the sheriff's eyes narrow as he gauged the shifting mood. Not everyone in Shoshone was under Coltrane's thumb, and Warren's bold stand had given others courage to speak. Sheriff Thornton raised his hand for silence. "All right, everyone calm down. Miss Ramsey, you will stay in town until I complete a proper investigation. If the evidence supports your claim of self-defense, no charges will be filed. But you are confined to the boarding house until I say otherwise. Pike, you can put your heroics away for now. But if there is any trouble, any at all, both of you will answer for it. It was not perfect, but it was better than being cast out into the wilderness." Helena nodded, not trusting her voice. Thomas Coltrane stormed off, several of his ranch hands following, but the immediate danger had passed. The crowd began to disperse, returning to their daily business with plenty to gossip about. Warren approached Helena as she sagged against the water trough, the adrenaline leaving her body and making her legs weak. Up close, she could see the concern in his eyes, though his expression remained calm. "Let me take you to the doctor," he said quietly. "That shoulder needs tending." "Why did you do that?" Helena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not even know me." He met her gaze directly, and she saw honesty there, pure and uncomplicated. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because I have seen too many good people get crushed by those with power and money. Sometimes someone has to stand up and say enough." The doctor's office was a small building near the edge of town, smelling of carbolic acid and dried herbs. Dr. Benjamin Walsh was a gruff man in his 50s who had seen every kind of injury the West could inflict. He examined Helena's shoulder with practiced efficiency while Warren waited outside, giving her privacy. "The bullet just grazed you," the doctor said, cleaning the wound with stinging antiseptic. "You will have a scar but no permanent damage. You are lucky." Helena almost laughed at that. Lucky. She had left everything she knew, traveled across dangerous territory, and now found herself at the center of a town controversy that could still end badly. But as she thought of Warren Pike's steady voice saying, "She goes, I go," she supposed there were different kinds of luck. When the doctor finished bandaging her shoulder, Warren helped her back to the boarding house. Mrs. Abigail Foster, who ran the establishment, was a kindly widow who had shown Helena nothing but warmth since her arrival. She fussed over the injury and insisted Helena rest, bringing her tea and bread with butter, despite Helena's protests that she was not an invalid. Warren lingered in the doorway of the small room Helena rented, his hat in his hands. In the softer light, she could see the lines around his eyes, marks of years spent squinting into sun and wind. He could not have been more than 28 or 29, yet he carried himself with the steady assurance of someone much older. "Thank you," Helena said, the words feeling inadequate for what he had done. "I do not know how I can ever repay you." "No repayment needed," Warren replied. "But I think you should know that Thomas Coltrane is not going to let this go easily. He has influence with the territorial judge, and he might try to pressure the sheriff into changing his mind. You should be prepared for that possibility." Helena nodded, exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. "I have nowhere else to go. My father died 6 months ago. He had gambling debts I knew nothing about. The creditors took everything, including our home in Missouri. I sold what little remained and came west because I heard there were opportunities here for women willing to work hard. Shoshone was supposed to be my fresh start." Something flickered in Warren's expression, a shadow of understanding. "I know what it is like to start over with nothing," he said quietly. "I came to Idaho territory 5 years ago after my family's ranch in Texas was destroyed by a range war, lost my parents and my younger sister to the violence. Sometimes the only way forward is to keep moving until you find a place that feels like it might become home." The shared pain created an instant connection between them, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both been shaped by loss. Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to show more weakness today. "I am sorry for your losses," she said softly. "And I am sorry for yours," Warren replied. "Get some rest now. I will check on you tomorrow and see what the sheriff has learned." He left, closing the door gently behind him, and Helena lay back on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Her shoulder throbbed with steady pain, but it was nothing compared to the turmoil in her heart. A stranger had stood up for her when no one else would, and she did not even fully understand why. All she knew was that when Warren Pike spoke, she believed him completely, and that kind of trust was rarer than gold in this harsh country. The next morning brought news both good and bad. Jasper Coltrane would recover fully, which removed the specter of a murder charge hanging over Helena's head. But the younger Coltrane was telling everyone who would listen that Helena had shot him without provocation, that he had merely been talking to her when she pulled a gun and fired. It was his word against hers, and in a territory where women had few legal protections, that could be enough to condemn her. Warren appeared at the boarding house just after breakfast, looking tired as though he had not slept well. "The sheriff is interviewing witnesses from the saloon," he told Helena when Mrs. Foster allowed him into the front parlor. "I spoke to a few of the girls who work there. One of them, a woman named Lily, saw what happened. She is scared of losing her job if she speaks up, but I think I convinced her that keeping silent is worse." Hope flared in Helena's chest. "If she tells the truth, the sheriff will have to believe me." "Maybe," Warren said, though his tone suggested doubt. "Coltrane has deep pockets, and people have been known to change their stories when enough money is involved. But it is a chance, and right now, chances are all we have." Over the next 3 days, Helena remained confined to the boarding house while the investigation continued. Warren visited every day, bringing news and supplies, sitting with her in the parlor while Mrs. Foster chaperoned from a discreet distance. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to dreams for the future, and with each passing hour, Helena felt herself drawn more deeply to this quiet cowboy who had risked so much for a stranger. Warren told her about working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas before the range wars, about nights under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt, about the raw beauty of the high desert, and the way the Sawtooth Mountains turned purple at sunset. Helena spoke of her father, a kind man who had loved books and music but had a fatal weakness for card games, and of her mother who had died when Helena was 12, leaving her to manage a household she was too young to understand. "I was supposed to marry," Helena confessed on the third day, her voice soft with old pain. "A merchant's son back in Missouri. But when my father's debts came to light, his family wanted nothing to do with me. They said I came from bad blood, that the gambling sickness might be in me too. It hurt more than I expected, even though I did not love him. It was the rejection, the sudden understanding that my value was tied only to what I could bring to a marriage, not who I was as a person." Warren's jaw tightened. Then they were fools. A person's worth is not measured in money or family connections. It is measured in how they treat others, in their courage when things get hard, in their willingness to do what is right even when it costs them something. "Is that why you stood up for me?" Helena asked, meeting his eyes. "Because you thought it was right, partly," Warren admitted. "But also because when I saw you standing there bleeding and defiant, refusing to back down even though you were terrified, I recognized something. The same fire that kept me going after I lost everything. I could not let them snuff that out in you." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken emotion. Helena felt her pulse quicken, awareness of Warren's proximity making her skin warm despite the afternoon heat. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his pale eyes, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. Mrs. Foster cleared her throat meaningfully from across the room, and the moment broke. Warren stood, reaching for his hat. "I should go. But I will be back tomorrow. The sheriff said he will make his ruling by then." That night, Helena barely slept, anxiety and anticipation warring within her. The outcome of the investigation would determine her entire future in Shoshone, perhaps her entire future in Idaho territory. But beneath the fear ran another current, warm and insistent, the growing realization that her feelings for Warren Pike had moved far beyond gratitude. She thought about him constantly, replayed their conversations in her mind, found herself watching the window for his arrival each day with an eagerness that had nothing to do with news about the investigation. Sheriff Thornton summoned both Helena and Warren to his office the next afternoon. Thomas Coltrane was there too, standing near the window with his arms crossed, his expression thunderous. The sheriff sat behind his desk, looking weary and irritated, a stack of papers before him. "I have completed my investigation into the shooting of Jasper Coltrane," Thornton said without preamble. "I have interviewed 5 witnesses, including 3 women who work at the Silver Dollar Saloon, the bartender, and 2 patrons who were present. 4 of the 5 corroborate Miss Ramsey's account that Jasper Coltrane followed her into the back room, that she refused his advances, and that he became physically aggressive. The gun discharged during a struggle when Miss Ramsey was attempting to defend herself. Based on this testimony, I am ruling the shooting an act of self-defense. No charges will be filed." Relief crashed through Helena so powerfully she swayed on her feet. Warren's hand came to rest on her elbow, steadying her, and she leaned into that support gratefully. Thomas Coltrane exploded. "This is outrageous. You are taking the word of saloon women over my nephews. I am taking the word of 4 consistent testimonies over 1 inconsistent testimony," the sheriff replied coldly. "Your nephew's story has changed 3 times since the shooting. The physical evidence supports the witnesses' accounts. My ruling stands." "You have not heard the last of this," Coltrane snarled. "I will go to the territorial authorities." "You do that," Thornton said. "But until they override my decision, Miss Ramsey is free to remain in Shoshone without restriction. Now all of you get out of my office. I have actual criminal matters to attend to." Outside, in the bright afternoon sunlight, Helena finally let herself breathe. The nightmare was over. She could stay in Shoshone, could continue building the life she had come here to create. But as she turned to thank Warren once more, she saw something in his expression that made her heart skip. He was looking at her with such warmth, such open admiration that she felt transparent, as though he could see straight through to her soul. "You did it," he said softly. "You stood your ground and won." "We did it," Helena corrected. "If you had not spoken up that first day, I would be long gone, probably dead in the wilderness. Everything I have now I owe to you." Warren shook his head. "You owe me nothing, but I would like to ask you something if I may." "Anything," Helena said, meaning it. "Would you allow me to court you properly? I know the circumstances of our meeting were unusual, and I do not want you to feel obligated because of what happened. But these past few days, getting to know you, I have felt something I have not felt in years. Hope. Connection. The possibility of building something real with someone who understands what it means to survive hard times and come through stronger. If you do not feel the same, I will respect that and step back. But if you do, even a little, I would like the chance to see where this could go." Helena's vision blurred with sudden tears, but these were tears of joy, of overwhelming gratitude for this unexpected gift. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Yes, I would like that very much. I feel it too, Warren. From the moment you stood up for me, I felt like maybe I was not alone anymore. And these past days, talking with you, being near you, it has felt like coming home after a long journey." The smile that spread across Warren's face transformed it, erasing the weathered lines and making him look years younger. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers, and Helena felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. They courted through the late summer and into fall, as proper as frontier propriety allowed under Mrs. Foster's watchful eye. Warren took Helena on walks through the high desert landscape, showing her the hidden beauty of the sagebrush country, the secret springs where antelope came to drink, the ancient petroglyphs carved into cliff faces by peoples long vanished. They attended church socials and town dances, where Helena gradually won over the skeptical townspeople with her quiet dignity and tireless work ethic. She continued her job at the restaurant, saving every penny she could, while Warren worked the cattle ranges and broke horses for local ranchers. On Sunday afternoons, they would meet at the edge of town where a small creek ran through a stand of cottonwoods, and there, away from prying eyes, they would talk for hours about their hopes and dreams. "I want to have my own ranch someday," Warren confessed one golden October afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching leaves drift past on the current. "Nothing huge, just enough land to run a small herd and some horses, a place that is truly mine, where I can build something lasting. After losing everything in Texas, I swore I would never be at someone else's mercy again." "I think you would make an excellent rancher," Helena said, her hand resting comfortably in his. "You have a way with animals. I have seen how horses respond to you, how gentle you are even with the most skittish ones." Warren turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I want you to be part of that dream, Helena. I know we have not been courting long, but I have never been more certain of anything. I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you refuse to let the world break you. I want to build that ranch with you, create a life together, have children who will grow up knowing they come from parents who fought for what matters. Will you marry me?" Helena's breath caught. She had known this was coming, had felt the inevitability of it in every touch, every shared glance, every quiet conversation. But hearing the words spoken aloud still sent joy cascading through her like water over rocks. "Yes," she said, bringing his hand to her lips and kissing his knuckles. "Yes, Warren, I will marry you. I love you too, more than I thought possible. You gave me back my life, and now I want to spend that life with you." They married in November, in the small church at the center of Shoshone with half the town in attendance. Even Sheriff Thornton came, looking almost approving as he watched the ceremony. Thomas Coltrane was notably absent, but his shadow had faded over the months as the truth about his nephew's behavior became common knowledge. Jasper himself had left town in disgrace, heading to California to escape the whispers that followed him everywhere. Helena wore a simple dress of deep blue wool that Mrs. Foster had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Warren had gathered from the hills. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed her with such tenderness that Helena felt tears slip down her cheeks. These were different from the tears she had cried on that terrible August day. These were tears of joy, of completion, of finding her place in the world at last. They spent their wedding night in a room at the hotel, a luxury Warren had saved for weeks to afford. As he carefully unpinned Helena's hair and let it fall around her shoulders, his touch reverent and patient, she understood that this was about far more than physical desire. It was about trust, about two wounded souls choosing to be vulnerable with each other, about building something new from the ashes of old pain. "I never thought I would have this," Warren whispered against her temple as they lay tangled together afterward, moonlight streaming through the window. "A wife, a future, reasons to dream again. You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Helena murmured, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We saved each other, Warren, and now we get to live." They spent the winter months saving every cent they could. Living frugally in a small cabin they rented on the edge of Shoshone. Warren took extra work breaking horses and training cutting horses for ranchers throughout the territory, while Helena continued at the restaurant and took in sewing on the side. By spring, they had saved enough for a down payment on a small piece of land about 10 miles outside town, near the foothills where good grass grew and a year-round creek provided water. The land came with a dilapidated cabin that needed extensive repairs, but Warren and Helena threw themselves into the work with fierce determination. They rebuilt the roof, chinked the walls against winter winds, installed a proper stove, and cleared sagebrush to create a vegetable garden. Other townspeople came to help, barn-raising style, and Helena understood that they had been accepted fully into the community. The woman who had nearly been run out of town was now Mrs. Warren Pike, respected wife of a hard-working cowboy, and that transformation still amazed her sometimes. By summer, they had purchased their first cattle, just 20 head to start, and Warren began the slow process of building his herd. Helena discovered she had a natural talent for raising chickens and managing the household finances, stretching every dollar to its furthest limit. They worked from dawn until dusk, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied, and on quiet evenings, they would sit on their front porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, marveling at how far they had come. In September, Helena realized her monthly courses had not come. At first, she attributed it to stress and hard work, but when morning sickness began, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Childbirth was dangerous on the frontier, and infant mortality was heartbreakingly common. But when she told Warren the news, his face lit up with such pure happiness that her fears receded. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. A child who will grow up here on our land, in a home built on love and hard work. Thank you, Helena. Thank you for giving me this gift. Thank you for standing up for me when no one else would, Helena replied, covering his hand with hers. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. Everything good in my life flows from that moment when you said she goes, I go. The pregnancy progressed without major complications, though Helena tired easily and had to reduce her workload. Warren became fiercely protective, insisting she rest more and take on only light chores. Mrs. Foster visited regularly, bringing supplies and advice, and Dr. Walsh checked on Helena monthly, pronouncing her and the baby healthy. Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. Warren ensured they had ample firewood and supplies laid in, and they spent long evenings by the fire, Warren reading aloud from books Helena had brought from Missouri while she knitted tiny garments for the coming child. You think it will be a boy or a girl? Warren asked one night, his hand resting on Helena's swollen belly, feeling the baby kick. I do not know, Helena said, but either way, I hope the child has your strength and kindness. And your courage and determination, Warren replied, kissing her forehead. Between the two of us, this baby does not stand a chance of being ordinary. The baby came in late March, during a late snowstorm that made travel to town impossible. Mrs. Foster had stayed with them for the past week, preparing for exactly this eventuality. And when Helena's labor began in the early morning hours, the older woman took charge with calm efficiency. Warren paced outside for hours, unable to bear his wife's cries of pain but unwilling to go far from the cabin. When Mrs. Foster finally emerged and told him he had a son, Warren rushed inside to find Helena propped against pillows, exhausted and pale but smiling radiantly as she cradled a tiny bundle. The baby had dark hair like both his parents and Warren's striking blue eyes. He was perfect. Hello, little one, Warren whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and touching his son's impossibly small hand. I am your father, and this brave woman is your mother, and you are the luckiest child in all of Idaho territory because you get to grow up knowing you are loved beyond measure. They named him William Thomas Pike, after Warren's father and Helena's father combined, and the baby quickly became the center of their world. Warren proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with William during fussy nights, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until the baby settled. Helena nursed and nurtured, her love for her son fierce and all-consuming. As spring turned to summer, and William grew from a tiny newborn to a chubby, smiling infant, Helena and Warren settled into the rhythms of their new life. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. The cattle herd grew, Warren's reputation as a horse trainer brought an extra income, and Helena's garden produced abundantly. They were not wealthy, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. On a warm evening in August, exactly 2 years after the day Helena shot Jasper Coltrane, they sat on their porch watching William toddle around the yard, chasing chickens with delighted laughter. Warren had his arm around Helena's shoulders, and she leaned into his solid warmth, feeling utterly content. You ever think about what might have happened if things had gone differently that day? Helena asked quietly. If you had not spoken up, or if the sheriff had not agreed to investigate. Warren was silent for a moment, watching their son. I try not to, he admitted. It is too terrible to contemplate, but I do think about how one moment of courage, one decision to stand up for what is right, can change everything. If I had stayed silent that day, I would have lost something precious without even knowing it existed. I would have lost you. And I would have lost my life, probably, Helena said. "Or at least any chance of a good life. You gave me everything, Warren. Not just safety or protection, but the possibility of love and family and belonging. You gave me a home." "We gave each other a home," Warren corrected gently. "That is what love does. It creates a place where two people can be fully themselves, where past wounds can heal, where the future becomes something to anticipate rather than fear." Helena turned to kiss him, a kiss that still held the spark of their early passion but now also contained the deeper fire of committed love, of shared trials overcome, of absolute trust. When they pulled apart, William had abandoned the chickens and was toddling toward them with arms outstretched, demanding attention. Warren scooped him up, tossing him gently into the air and catching him, eliciting squeals of joy. Helena watched her husband and son, this family she had thought lost forever, and felt her throat tighten with emotion. The journey that had brought her to Shoshone had been hard, marked by loss and fear and desperate uncertainty. But standing up for herself, even when it cost her everything, had led her here, to this moment, to this life that was richer than any she could have imagined. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. The ranch grew steadily, and Warren earned a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in southern Idaho. Helena expanded her chicken operation and began selling eggs and preserves in town, her business acumen surprising even herself. They hired occasional help during busy seasons, becoming employers themselves, and treating their workers with the fairness and respect they had both longed for in their younger days. William grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the horses and the wide open spaces. When he was 4, Helena gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Helena's mother. The little girl had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination, and from her earliest days it was clear she would be a force to be reckoned with. Thomas Coltrane eventually sold his ranch and left Idaho Territory, broken by financial reversals and scandals involving his nephew's continued bad behavior in California. The townspeople spoke of it as a kind of justice, though Warren and Helena said little. They had moved beyond that conflict, built a life that had nothing to do with old grudges and everything to do with new possibilities. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Warren took Helena back to the spot by the creek where he had proposed. The cottonwoods were golden with fall color, and the water ran clear and cold. They sat together on the bank, holding hands as they had so many times before. "I have been thinking about that day in town," Warren said, "when the sheriff wanted you gone by dawn, and I said if you went, I would go too. I did not plan those words. They just came out, powered by something I did not fully understand at the time, but I understand it now. It was my heart recognizing yours, knowing that if I let you disappear, I would regret it for the rest of my life." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think about it too, about how close I came to losing everything before I even knew what I could have, about how one person's courage gave me the chance to find my courage. You taught me that standing up for what is right, even when it is hard, is always worth it." "We taught each other," Warren said, echoing words he had spoken many times before. "That is the secret, I think. Love is not about one person saving another. It is about two people choosing to stand together to face whatever comes as a team. We stayed, Helena. We stayed when they wanted us gone, and we built something beautiful from that act of defiance. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Then they walked home together, hand in hand, to the ranch they had carved from wilderness, to the children waiting for them, to the life they had chosen and fought for and built with their own hands. Sheriff Thornton retired eventually, replaced by a younger man who knew the Pikes only as respected members of the community. Mrs. Foster passed peacefully in her sleep, and Helena wept at her funeral, remembering the kindness the older woman had shown when she had needed it most. Dr. Walsh trained a young physician to take over his practice, ensuring Shoshone continued to have medical care as he aged. The town itself grew and changed. The railroad came through in the early 1890s, bringing new residents and new opportunities. Some of the rough edges wore away as civilization encroached on the wild frontier. But in the high desert and the mountain foothills, the land remained largely untamed, and those who worked it still needed the same grit and determination that had defined the earlier era. William grew into a fine young man who shared his father's quiet strength and his mother's quick mind. He went away to study agriculture at the new state college, then returned to the ranch with modern ideas about breeding and land management. Rose became a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch that served the scattered children of the region. Both children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, of courage in the face of injustice, of love born from shared struggle. "Tell us again about the day Papa stood up for you," Rose would beg her mother during long winter evenings, even though she had heard the story dozens of times. And Helena would tell it, never tiring of the tale because it was the foundation of everything good in her life. She would describe the fear and the anger, the wound bleeding through her dress, the sheriff's cold dismissal. And then Warren's voice, steady and certain, saying the words that changed everything. "She goes, I go." "That is when I knew," Helena would say, looking at her husband across the room, their eyes meeting with the ease of long familiarity. "That is when I knew there was still good in the world, still people willing to do the right thing no matter the cost. Your father gave me hope when I had none left, and hope is the most precious gift one person can give another." As they aged, Warren and Helena remained devoted partners, working the ranch side by side even as their children gradually took over the heavier labor. Warren's hair went silver, and Helena's developed wings of white at the temples. Lines deepened around their eyes and mouths, but these were lines of laughter and love, earned through decades of shared joy. On quiet evenings, they still sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains, now accompanied by grandchildren who climbed on their laps and demanded stories. The ranch had become a true family enterprise, spanning generations, built on the foundation Warren and Helena had laid with courage and love. When they had been married for 25 years, the town of Shoshone threw a celebration in their honor. Nearly everyone in the region attended, testament to the respect the Pikes had earned through years of hard work and fair dealing. There were speeches praising their contributions to the community, but the words that mattered most came from their children. William stood before the crowd and spoke of his parents' example, of the values they had instilled through action rather than lecture. "They taught us that standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult, is the only way to live with honor," he said. "They taught us that love is not passive or easy but active and courageous. They taught us that home is not a place, but the people you choose to stand with through every storm." Rose added, "When I teach the children who come to our school, I tell them about courage. Not the courage of gunfighters or outlaws, but the courage of ordinary people who refuse to let injustice stand. My mother's courage in defending herself. My father's courage in defending her when no one else would. That is the legacy they have given us, and it is worth more than all the gold in California." Helena wept openly, and Warren held her hand tightly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. They had never sought recognition or praise, had simply tried to live according to their principles. but hearing their children articulate the values that had guided them felt like a benediction, confirmation that their struggles had meaning beyond their own lives. More years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the turning of seasons. There were hard times, droughts that withered crops and disease that struck the herds, but the family weathered them together, drawing on reserves of determination that ran bone deep. There were joyful times too, weddings and births, harvests and celebrations, all the ordinary miracles that make up a well-lived life. Warren and Helena celebrated their 30th anniversary quietly, just the two of them riding out to the original boundaries of their ranch. The land had expanded considerably over the decades, but this first section remained special, the place where their dream had taken root. 30 years, Warren mused, sitting his horse beside Helena's. It seems like yesterday and forever ago all at once. I know what you mean, Helena replied. Sometimes I can still feel myself as that terrified young woman in town, certain my life was over. And then I look around at everything we have built, and it seems impossible that one led to the other. But it did, Warren said. Every day since then, we have been building this. Every choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. Every decision to stand together rather than apart. Every moment of choosing love over fear. This ranch, this family, this life, it is all built on thousands of small acts of courage and commitment. Helena guided her horse closer so she could reach for Warren's hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally as they had for 3 decades. I would do it all again, she said. Every hard moment, every struggle, every fear, because it led me here to you, to this. As would I, Warren agreed. You are the great adventure of my life, Helena Pike. Everything else is just details. They rode back to the ranch house as the sun began to set, 2 aging riders moving across the high desert with the ease of long practice. Behind them, the mountains glowed purple and gold in the fading light. Ahead, lights shone from the windows of the home they had built together, promising warmth and welcome. The years continued their inexorable march. Warren and Helena both lived to see their grandchildren grown and starting families of their own. The ranch passed primarily to William's management, though Warren remained involved until his body finally forced him to slow down. Helena continued her egg and preserves business into her 70s, her products sought after throughout the region. When they had been married for 40 years, on a warm August evening that reminded Helena powerfully of the night they first met, Warren suffered a heart attack. It was quick and relatively painless, the doctor said later, trying to offer comfort. One moment Warren was sitting on the porch with Helena, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. The next, he slumped against her shoulder, and by the time she eased him down and screamed for help, he was gone. Helena's grief was profound but not bitter. They had been given 4 decades together, which was more than many frontier couples could claim. They had loved deeply and built something lasting, had raised children who embodied their values, had known the profound satisfaction of a shared life fully lived. As she stood at Warren's grave, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Helena understood that their legacy would continue long after both of them had turned to dust. She lived 3 more years after Warren's death, remaining on the ranch in a small cottage William built for her near the main house. She spent her days reading, tending a small garden, and telling stories to any grandchild or great-grandchild who would listen. Always, she spoke of Warren with love and admiration, keeping his memory vivid and alive. On a September morning, as golden leaves drifted from the cottonwoods and the air held the first hint of coming winter, Helena simply did not wake up. She passed peacefully in her sleep, a slight smile on her aged face, and those who found her said she looked at peace at last. The town of Shoshone turned out in force for her funeral, recognizing that an era had ended. The woman who had nearly been run out of town 43 years earlier was now remembered as one of the founding mothers of the community, a symbol of courage and resilience. Her story, their story, became part of local legend, passed down through generations as an example of how one moment of standing up for justice could change everything. William and Rose buried their mother beside their father, under the shadow of the mountains they had both loved. On the shared headstone, beneath their names and dates, William had inscribed words his father had spoken often. "We stayed, and we built something beautiful." The ranch continued to prosper under William's management, and eventually passed to his own children, who maintained the traditions Helena and Warren had established. The values they had lived by: courage, fairness, hard work, love became the foundation upon which subsequent generations built their own lives. The story of the sheriff who wanted Helena run out of town by dawn, and the cowboy who said, "She goes, I go," echoed through the decades, inspiring others to stand up for what was right even when it carried a cost. In the end, Helena and Warren's legacy was not measured in land or cattle or money, though the ranch remained prosperous. It was measured in lives touched, in principles upheld, in the example they had set of what two people could build when they chose love over fear and justice over convenience. They had started with nothing but courage and determination, and they had created a dynasty that would endure long after their own stories ended. The land they had claimed from wilderness continued to sustain their descendants. The house they had built continued to shelter their family, and the love they had shared continued to inspire those who heard their tale. In Shoshone, Idaho, where the high desert meets the mountains and the wind carries whispers of the past, people still speak of Helena Ramsey and Warren Pike, the woman who refused to be broken and the man who refused to let injustice stand. They stayed when they could have fled. They fought when they could have surrendered, and they built a love that transcended the hardship of their era to become something timeless and true. Their story became woven into the fabric of the region's history, a reminder that the Wild West was not just about gunslingers and outlaws, but also about ordinary people who faced extraordinary circumstances with grace and courage. Helena and Warren Pike lived the kind of love that people write songs about, not because it was easy or dramatic, but because it was real and hard-won and absolutely worth every struggle they endured to achieve it. And so their story ends where all great love stories must, with lives fully lived, with family surrounding them, with the knowledge that their brief time on earth had mattered, had meant something, had left the world better than they found it. They had stayed when others wanted them gone, had loved when others said they should not, and had built a legacy that would endure long after their own chapter in the story had closed. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.